Welcome in, everybody. It's Load the Box on January 30th, 2023. The Vikings offseason is in full swing, 2 weeks removed from the wild card loss to the Giants. So, Jordan, tonight we're going to be talking a lot about what is going to be sort of required, at least from our perspective, of this front office and coaching staff looking into 2023 and, the upcoming offseason and, of course, then season. There's a bunch of needs. It was very obvious that the team that finished first in the NFC North but lost in the first round of the playoffs has a lot of holes and a lot of things that need to be fixed. So we're going to put on our GM hats and do the best we can to see what we can address on our end. How does that sound?
Yeah. It sounds absolutely amazing. I put on the one, so I own a UC beanie, but I don't think I own any like ball caps for college teams. But I decided to go with the Notre Dame beanie. Bought it whenever I went out to a Notre Dame game a couple years ago, and it was a whole lot of fun. And so, yeah, it's draft season, it's off-season season, and I said it last week, and it's going to be a thing in every show until after the draft. This is when Super Bowls are won in the offseason. You win them in the offseason by signing key free agents and having a good draft. So I think that a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be it goes hand in hand. You can already see, I'm not revealing anything. You can see the top 5 things that we've laid out for the Vikings to do this offseason. I think every one of them except for number 2 involved the draft and free agency heavily. And so, let's jump right into it. Number 5 is a running back overhaul. I want to ask you this question and kind of put you on the spot. Is there any interest from you to bring back? I think we're in agreement about Dalvin Cook not being a Viking. Is there any interest to bring back Madison? Maybe if he takes something a little team friendly, or do you think it's time to just go young, fresh, all the way across?
So, I think 2 things. First, addressing Dalvin Cook. I think, if I was the general manager, I would probably move on just because I think we've talked about expensive. He's declining. Although he was healthy all of this season, he's got an injury history, all those things. But if for whatever reason, if he was willing to take a massive pay cut, I got no issue to keep him around. He's been with the franchise for so long, and he was a captain this year. He clearly impacts that locker room in a positive way. So I highly doubt it, though, because when it comes down to him, he's making too much money to justify for a running back in the current NFL. On the Alexander Madison side, I would definitely consider it. At times when he has shown, or when he has been the starting running back for the Vikings in the last few years, when Cook goes out with injury, he's shown to be very productive and very much, he's a satisfactory running back in the NFL today. He's not gonna knock your socks off, but at the same time, he's productive. He's pretty explosive. This season, I saw a lot more straight line downhill power from him, which I really appreciated because I think it provided a different sort of complement to Dalvin Cook's sort of shifty finesse running where, Alexander Madison was a little bit more aggressive. All that being said, if he's able and willing to take sort of a cheap team-friendly deal for a few million a year or something, I would definitely consider it. I contributed to a piece on VikingsTerritory.com a couple weeks ago where we talked about what the running back room should look like. And my take on it was, get rid of the Cook contract and sign either, I think I had 3 names, Boston Scott, Samaje Perine, and or Alexander Madison. One of those 3 to sort of be the veteran ahead of Ty Chandler or alongside Ty Chandler. So that's kind of how I see it. I'm okay with Madison coming back. Sometimes, though, it's good to just get some fresh new faces. What do you think?
Yeah, so the question is, because, he's probably going to get $2 or $3 million on the free agency market. So do you think you can use that $2 or $3 million somewhere else? Or really, because you're going to draft somebody to replace him. So maybe it's closer to $1.5 to $2 million or $2.5 million to can you use that money elsewhere, maybe on the defensive side of the ball? And I just think you can. Madison has looked good, but I don't think him or Cook really fit the mold of what you. I don't want to say a modern NFL running back, but like I'm envious of these teams that are like San Francisco that are lining the running back up in the slot. Like New Orleans with Alvin Kamara or San Francisco with Christian McCaffrey. And so I think the Vikings, I think that there are some value names in the draft that they can get maybe early day 3, late day 2 that can provide a similar value as to what Alvin Kamara brings to the Saints for significantly cheaper than what Alex Madison or especially Dalvin Cook is going to be able to do. So I'm more on the team of like cleanse it out, just let him go, let Alex Madison go wherever he's going to go, and I wish him nothing but the best. I have nothing against Alex Madison. I just think that, I think that we can find that production in the draft. And so I'm team, let's just let Ty Chandler be the starter and let a rookie be his backup.
Do you think, so not being yourself here or, what the fans would do, but if you were actually, the Vikings with, their 5 draft picks that they have, do you think they will actually take a running back in the draft?
I do. So this is kind of a spoiler because I don't know when we're going to get into mock drafts and everything, but I mean, that day is coming very quickly and I'm already doing them on the side. I think that the Vikings are going to trade down to get more day 2 and day 3 picks. And I think that you could see the Vikings move back pretty frequently and really do a lot of moving around with their picks and maybe even trading to get more picks this year with picks for next year and kind of just doing that over and over again, almost like the anti-Spielman, where Spielman would constantly be collecting picks for the next year's draft. You might see Kwesi be aggressive with those picks for this draft to build a team for this upcoming 2023 season. So I do think that running back is on the table for the Vikings in the draft, but the Vikings fans need to get this Bijan Robinson fantasy out of their heads. I don't think he'll be there at 23 or 24, and I don't think the Vikings should take a running back in the first round. It's just like not that. I don't think we are a Bijan Robinson away from winning the Super Bowl. And so like I don't see the value in that selection at all. So I think that it could happen, but it's going to be like a Dalvin Cook, day 2, day 3 type of thing.
Well, then to that point, you mentioned the future, right? You mentioned, does Kwesi spend his draft picks this year, or does he, sell them for future value? Like you were saying, Rick Spielman might. And that totally pertains to the next point on our list, if we're going up, is the QB future. Yeah. If you've been anywhere near Vikings Twitter in the last 2 weeks, you will know that Kirk Cousins' future has been discussed ad nauseum every day, all day. Trade, cut, extend.
I mean, what else is new? It's a yearly tradition. It's like Vikings fans watch these playoff quarterbacks, and we say, man, Kirk Cousins doesn't look like that really, because there isn't like a Tom Brady in the playoffs right now, right? I mean, you look at the quarterbacks that are in there, the most Cousins-esque is Brock Purdy, and he was the last pick of the draft. So it's like, I get where Vikings fans are coming from. I see the frustration that some of them have.
Yeah, so it's the inevitable conversation, right? And so kind of our take on it, and we have sort of, I think, a little bit of differing opinions on this, but there's maybe a couple different options, right? If you really wanted to be, clickbait, you could say the Vikings are going to go get Tom Brady and trade Kirk Cousins. I don't think that's happening. I don't think you think that's happening. So we're not going to spend too much time on the whole Tom Brady rumors and just fanfare that is being spewed on the social medias. The couple different options that we're looking at are either extend Kirk Cousins for a short-term contract. We're not talking a 5-6 year deal or anything like that. Or draft or trade for a young quarterback. To sort of be the quarterback of the future, to actually sort of build something for the future. And it pertains to that idea of whether or not Kwesi and Kevin and company feel like now is the time to sort of retool and go for it. Or if they think, all right, let's take a punch in the gut for maybe a year or two with maybe a less productive quarterback for now, but will be better in the future. So, Jordan, I know you've done a lot of thought on this, a lot of research on this. what are your thoughts sort of on the Vikings quarterback future, what they should do and what they will do?
So what they will do is extend Kirk Cousins one more year. I don't see a world in which I keep wanting to like take this very anti-Cousins stance, and I can't after the season he had. But like what came to mind when planning this little spiel, if you will, was like, you know, I don't see any way out of this Cousins hellscape that the Vikings have put me in, but it hasn't been. Like, we won 13 games. He looked amazing this season. He looked really good this season. I don't want to say amazing, but he looked really good this season. And so, I think that there are, and this is the one that I had the most trouble condensing into like a bite-sized bit. So bear with me if I ramble. But there's 3 options the Vikings have if they want to get rid of Cousins, and I'm gonna give you like the NFL comp. So there's the Pat Mahomes, which is the Vikings made the playoffs. They lost in the wild card round. You package some first round picks. You move up into the top 10. You take a quarterback. I don't know if there's one in this draft that has, you know, incredibly high upside, but everyone's kind of low on because he, you know, they didn't love his scheme in college or they think he's too raw. That's a joke because Anthony Richardson is exactly that. So maybe the Vikings make a power play and they move up and they draft him, and Cousins is the starter in 2023, but then it's Richardson's team in 24. The second option would be like Russell Wilson, I think, which is kind of like the take a guy on day 2. Maybe he impresses you in camp. You see some, you know, you like his leadership, you like his ceiling. Obviously, the floor is going to be lower, and so you know it's less risky because you don't expect as much out of a third round pick. But if you can get a guy, if you hit on it, then hey, you hit on a quarterback. And then there's the Brock Purdy, which is I think the actual better one is the Nate Stanley, which is you take a guy in the 7th round and he flames out in like a year, and you know he works for UPS.
You're back to square one.
Yeah, and you're back to square one. So I think realistically the Vikings will extend Cousins. I would like to see them, and I'm latching my name to it. Drum roll, please. The Jordan Hawthorne quarterback that I want the Vikings to take this season. It's Jaren Hall. He replaced Zach Wilson at BYU. He's not.
Oh no.
No. Hang on.
Don't get me started with these BYU quarterbacks.
So
again.
He's different though, and like the similarities. Zach Wilson. Yeah, I'll do like a whole breakdown at some point on quarterback, so I won't go into it too much, but like I think he's going to be there in the 2nd round, maybe even the 3rd round. I think you can take him. He has all the traits that you want physically. He's a great leader. He did like a year mission or a 2-year mission before entering college. Like he's a stand-up guy. He's a great leader. You don't have to worry about him, you know, like getting elected for drunk and disorderly like Stetson Bennett. So I just think that he's a solid pick that they could take in this late 2nd round, trade up, and then let him sit behind Coke for a year, maybe 2, and then maybe you move on to him, and if he's bad, then whatever. It was a 2nd round pick. It was a 3rd round pick whenever you took him. So that's what I want to see him do, is take somebody. I would like to say in round 2. I want to see him move up into round 2 and get a guy. So that's kind of my opinion on it. But they do. It's time. Like it's time to get somebody in the building. Kirk is not getting younger. He is actually doing the opposite, and he is getting older. So you know you have to pull that trigger at some point.
Yeah, and Cousins has he's continued to play well. I mean, obviously, you know, more interceptions this year, passer rating down a little bit, whatever.
More wins.
Production in terms of wins and clutch plays and winning plays surpassed years past, and I don't think anybody can contend with that unless all you focus on is the 4th and 8th play.
Yeah.
So, but you know, he's continuing to play well, but like you said, at a certain point, all of these guys will gradually fall off. With Peyton Manning, it was sort of a stark, sort of like saddening reality of where he couldn't throw a deep ball anymore, and every ball was wobbly.
Yeah.
Tom Brady is starting to happen, actually. Obviously, these are the greats. Kirk Cousins isn't in their class, but everybody starts to fall off, and so eventually that's going to have to happen.
I do think there's some merit.
I like your approach.
I do think there's some merit, and I don't want to spend like a ton of time doing this. The same old dance that every Vikings show is going to do every offseason, but like I think there is some merit to you look at the 4 teams that just played in the NFC Championship game, and it was a 7th round pick who they pay like $100,000 a year. It was a second round pick in Jalen Hurts. So Brock Purdy and Jalen Hurts. It was the number 1 pick, but still on a rookie contract in Joe Burrow. And then it was Pat Mahomes, who some people consider the greatest quarterback in terms of talent to ever play the game. Like, so we're talking about either like historically great or cheap, so you can build a team around. And I do think that there's something to that. Well, like, yes, San Francisco was paying for Jimmy G, but Jimmy G took a massive pay cut to stay in San Francisco to be a backup because he didn't see a market for himself elsewhere. So, like, I don't know. I think the Vikings front office, and I meant to say this at the lead of the show and I forgot to, but like, I think they have to make a decision on if you think you can win a Super Bowl in 23, extend Kirk, move all the money to next season or to 2024 season. Go all in, trade these draft picks for Jalen Ramsey, and trade that. Like, you have to hit on a lot of draft picks. You have to be creative with your salary cap and really go all in. But if you're not going to do that, don't just settle for like a 10-win season and a wild card loss. Like, if this is going to be a rebuilding year, I'm not saying cut everybody and go 1-16. But like, don't extend Coke. Don't extend Coke if you're not going all in. Just let him play out his contract. And then let Coke go into the great beyond and enjoy the years that he gave us and move in a different direction so you can kind of reopen a window, I guess is what I would get at.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. I think this whole scenario could go so many different ways. And we could spend, an entire off season's worth of shows talking about it, because the idea of, you either extend Kirk or you don't, and you sort of rebuild. Well, that really only works if you get the right quarterback after him.
Right.
And so the Vikings need to, and it's obviously a lot easier said than done, but they either need to draft that quarterback or they need to trade for that quarterback. You're not going to get a young quarterback in free agency that's going to be, unless you want Daniel Jones, but I don't think anybody wants Daniel Jones regardless of what he did to the Vikings in the wild card round. So,
and you're going to pay him Kirk Cousins money anyway. Like, he's going to make like $30 million. Like, it's not like you're getting a discount.
Yeah, and given where Cousins' salary is at today, he's not overpaid like he probably was a few years ago. The quarterback market has caught up to him and exceeded him, and he's now paid about the 10th most money for quarterbacks, and he's about the 10th or 12th best quarterback. So he's paid about what he should be paid. But all that being said, can you build a roster good enough around him to go win a Super Bowl? And what I mean, back to the comment about, whether or not a rebuild will work if you get the right quarterback. The conundrum there is if Minnesota decides, all right, we're done with Kirk after this year, we're going to let him play out his final year. But if they then draft a quarterback who just face plants, then you're really SOL, and you're sort of in this 1-16 sort of purgatory, with a bad defense and a young quarterback who doesn't know what he's doing. So I think I'll just say a couple words on what the extension of Kirk Cousins actually, what an extension of Kirk Cousins might actually be good for is, one thing, the Vikings would have to give up a lot to move up in the draft, whether it's future draft capital or this year's draft capital or players. If they can offload some of these old expensive contracts, they'd love to, but that probably wouldn't happen. Right. So you're probably giving up a lot to move up, because the 24th pick or 23rd pick doesn't probably contain your quarterback of the future. Most likely. You could get lucky, but chances are it probably does not. So you're probably giving up a lot, which means then you're probably mortgaging some of the future that you're trying to build for this young quarterback. So there's that piece. The other alternative, if you're trying to be continually competitive, which Kwesi has said, he wants this to be a competitive rebuild. There's not just two realities in the NFL. There's not just Super Bowl and Jacksonville for the last 3 years, excluding this year. It's not either we're winning 14 games or we're losing 14 games. There is a middle ground, and it's okay to be in the middle ground. Frankly, the Giants and the Vikings both could have considered themselves to be in rebuild year 1 this year. They both made the playoffs. They both beat each other once. They both had 10-win seasons. There's a lot of value in that. You kind of rekindle a fan base. You get the team believing in each other. You're starting to lay a foundation. And even if 2023 is not Super Bowl year, you can still continue to lay that foundation and stay competitive. And so if you extend Cousins by another year or even 2, you are continuing to keep yourself relevant, to encourage free agents to come here. The other thing, too, is if you're going to continue to be competitive, you're not going to get a high draft pick most likely. And so drafting the quarterback of the future is a lot easier said than done. And so I think Kwesi and Kevin, they want to keep this team competitive. So I think there's a lot of merit in that sense of let's extend him at least another year, and let's see if we can rebuild this defense, get him to a level that's better, and see if we can, draft the young defensive players rather than a young quarterback. So there's so many layers to this. We've only scratched the surface. But is there anything else that you want to touch on with this whole quarterback discussion?
I want to say this, and then I want to quickly move into wide receiver 2. I think we can do 3 and 2 very quickly, and then spend the rest of the show on fixing the defense, kind of. And I will say this. What people don't talk about is, yes, the Chiefs were a playoff team whenever they went, they went to the playoffs, they traded up, they took Mahomes, and then Mahomes started, 2 years after that. The Chiefs were not a playoff team because they had a good offense, but their defense was also very good with Alex Smith. And so they were kind of I would consider a defensive-led team that drafted what turned into a superstar quarterback and then, quickly became a very offensive team overnight almost. And it wasn't overnight, but you know what I mean. The Vikings, I like what you brought up. They're not. And now, a young quarterback would be in no better situation than Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson and whatever wide receiver 2 we land on here in a moment. I think that's a great situation to be in with Kevin O'Connell as the head coach. The issue is your defense is probably going to let up 30 points a game and 500 yards a game, especially if we traded up to get you, and now we don't have any picks to go get a linebacker or get a corner. So I see both sides of the argument, but let's move into wide receiver 2. I really you're going to hear this a lot if you watch mock drafts and if you follow draft content. You're going to hear a lot I don't love this wide receiver class. There's nobody that's going to be an all-pro in this wide. I disagree. I think that there are 3 guys in this wide receiver class that are going to be very, very good NFL football players. There always are good wide receivers in the draft, and I think the Vikings are slotted perfectly at 23, 24, whatever, to trade back and then use a second-round pick on a wide receiver if they really want to attack that position heavily. And I also think it's worth note that says wide receiver 2, not a second option, because I do still think TJ Hawkinson is going to be second option next season because he is really, really talented. And I still maintain Kevin O'Connell, you should have had TJ Hawkinson pass the sticks on that last play of the season. I'll never forgive you for that. But Will, what do you think of finding a wide receiver 2? This is the real question. How high of a priority do you put wide receiver 2 at this offseason?
It's not that high of a priority. I think it's important. I wrote an article about it last week. I think it's an important thing that we need to do for a couple of reasons. One being, I think Justin Jefferson is the Vikings are way too reliant on Justin Jefferson. In the games in which he doesn't crack 100 yards, they struggle. I think there was some stat where, they went 1-4 or something on games in which he received under 50 yards or something. Just if he doesn't have a good game, they're not going to win. So that's one thing. The other reason is we need to have obviously we need to give Cousins more weapons, but we also need to prove to Justin Jefferson that they're serious about making this offense electric and competitive. And because the last thing that I want to see happen is Jefferson, which we're going to talk about, they're going to pay him if they want to keep him. And he's not going to want to stick around a franchise that isn't serious about actually competing.
Right.
And that's another anecdote why I think extending Kirk will actually be helpful for keeping Justin Jefferson, because he knows Kirk can deliver the ball to him. he doesn't know if a rookie can deliver the ball to him. And so that'd be another reason for, like, if you want to pay Justin and keep Justin, you got to get some help on the outside. So I think there's a lot of reasons for why this is important. It's not the only thing. Justin Jefferson's smart enough to know that defense matters, and you can't rely on putting up 35 a game. So I think it's important. I think defense probably needs to be priority one, which is why it's number one on our list.
Right.
But whether it's through the draft or another piece I wrote about, like I said, getting a wide receiver through trade or free agency, just a couple names I'll throw out there that are probably the most realistic would be Alan Lazard from Green Bay. He's a free agent. Darius Slayton is a free agent. And then Jerry Jeudy, he's got a year left on his contract plus a potential fifth-year option. There's a trade out there with Denver that could happen that I think would be very interesting. Denver needs to recoup some draft capital that they lost in the Russell Wilson trade. So those three names I think could be really interesting for the Vikings to pursue, outside of the draft.
Yeah, I think in the interest of time, because we're running a little bit short for today's episode, we'll talk about like wide receivers in the draft at a later date and time. But I do think that Alan Lazard and Jerry Jeudy excite me a lot as Jefferson's Robin to his Batman. And I do think that should be, I think it's the second highest priority in terms of additions to this team. I don't think we need to spend too much time on number 2. I think we're in agreement. Pay Justin Jefferson whatever he wants. He's owned it. He's put himself in, he's put his name on lists with Randy Moss and Chris Carter and all the Vikings greats. He's one of the greatest Vikings wide receivers of all time. I want him in purple until he decides he hates football. Don't let that man leave. Pay him. Give him everything. Everything you have. like that. That's my take on it. Do you disagree?
I don't disagree. I think, obviously there's a cap issue with every high-paid player. You also get into those discussions of like, well, then can we pay Kirk Cousins and all that? Becomes this whole math equation. But Justin Jefferson's a generational talent. You can't just let him walk out the door. With how important wide receivers and weapons are in the NFL today, he's way too important to this team and to the success of this team to just let him leave.
Yeah.
So I'm all for extending him, signing him to a big contract, make him the highest paid wide receiver. Obviously, then, it constrains your ability to spend more, but you have to do it. You have to do it, or you're going to be rewinding again. You're going to go back to, throwing to Troy Williamson. So we don't want that.
Throwing to Jarius Wright and a young Stephon Diggs.
It's like, they're fine, but they're not going to.
Yeah, they're not. They're not doing anything special like Jefferson did this season, and I think that I don't even think this was a ceiling, so you have to pay him. And then number 1 on the list, which is so broad, and we'll talk about it more as the offseason goes, we have to fix the defense, and I want to point out, I know Seattle's defense statistically was not very good this season, but if you look at Seattle's draft class from last season, they hit on like 3 or 4 defensive draft picks. The Vikings need a draft like that this year. These will be my final thoughts, and then I'll pass it to you to kind of get yours in, and then we'll get out of here. But the Vikings need to hit on 3 defensive draft picks, and not all of them can be in the first round. Not all of them can be like, oh, we took Will Anderson out of Alabama. He's going to be good, I bet. No. You have to be smart. You have to take, calculated risks. Get 3 quality defensive starters this season, and then hope that the guys Andrew Booth, Lewis Seen, the linebacker Brian Asamoah, those guys are going to have to step up, because I think that a youth infusion is coming, and hopefully Brian Flores is coming with it, because as of recording this, no news on the defensive coordinator front. So that's all you have for me. Follow Shop Unified. Follow Will on Twitter at Will Badloose. Check out the Bad Loser blog and Vikings Territory. Follow the show on Twitter at LTB Vikings. Will, you have a minute and a half.
All right, I'll close this down really briefly. Like Jordan said, we want Brian Flores. That'd be the ideal. I don't think anybody would be overly excited about Mike Betton, just considering how he was a part of the defensive staff last year that was 31st in the league and really bad. So in terms of fixing the defense, the thing that I want to focus on is simply speed. I think speed needs to be addressed. Brian Asamoah's got wheels. He needs to see the field more. Caleb Evans, he's quick. Lewis Cine is a motor out there. He's got to stay healthy. Like you said, though, they need to add pieces and they need to be fast. It sounds simple, but if you looked at the Vikings defense this year, they looked slow and they looked old. And so, like you said, youth infusion with speed has got to happen. This league is way too much about weapons, getting them out in space, and you need to have guys that can make tackles in space, one-on-one, with a running back in the flat, with a tight end in the flat. You need to be able to make those tackles. So that's what I'm going for. I want speed and lots of it. That's all we got from Load the Box today. We will have lots more on these 5 topics in the weeks to come. But for all of us here at Load the Box tonight, Skol y'all.